Some mistakes don't make headlines until the sky starts looking for the man you just handcuffed. The neon sign outside Pine Ridge Motel buzzed softly against the humid Alabama night, casting red and blue reflections across cracked pavement that had seen better decades. Most people passing by would never have noticed room 214. It looked exactly like every other room on the property: faded curtains, a flickering porch light, and an old air conditioning unit humming against the wall. Inside, Marcus Reed sat quietly near the window with a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His jacket looked worn, his duffel bag looked ordinary, and nothing about him suggested importance. To anyone watching, he was just another tired traveler trying to get through the night. Across the parking lot, Officer Ryan Mitchell stepped out of his patrol vehicle and adjusted the radio clip to his shoulder. A routine call had brought him here. A motel clerk had reported a guest who seemed suspicious. Paid cash. Kept to himself. Asked unusual questions about exits and security cameras. Ryan had already made up his mind before he reached the door. Some people, he believed, were exactly what they appeared to be. He knocked once. Then twice. When the door opened, Marcus stood calmly in the doorway, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither man spoke. The warm night air drifted between them. Ryan looked Marcus up and down and immediately saw what he expected to see: a man alone, staying in a cheap motel, carrying no obvious explanation for why he was there. Marcus saw something different. He saw a man rushing toward conclusions. "Evening," Ryan said. "Mind answering a few questions?" Marcus glanced briefly toward the parking lot, then toward the dark highway beyond it. A faint concern crossed his face before disappearing. "Depends on the questions," he replied. Ryan frowned. He didn't like the answer. Within minutes, the conversation grew tense. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. Just the steady collision between suspicion and silence. Marcus remained polite, but he offered little information. Ryan interpreted every pause as guilt. Every calm response felt, to him, like resistance. Finally, Ryan informed Marcus that he would need to come downtown until everything could be sorted out. Several motel guests peeked through curtains. Someone recorded with a cell phone. Marcus looked down at his watch. Not nervously. Not angrily. Almost as if he were measuring something invisible. "Officer," he said quietly, "you should let me make one phone call." Ryan folded his arms. "Nobody's coming for you." Marcus held his gaze for several long seconds. Then he answered with a sentence so calm it barely sounded important. "That's exactly the problem." Ryan shook his head and guided him toward the patrol vehicle. Around them, the motel returned to its usual nighttime rhythm. The ice machine rattled. A truck passed on the interstate a quarter-mile away. A television flickered behind a curtain. Everything felt ordinary. Yet high above the sleeping town, beyond the clouds and darkness, events were already moving. Somewhere far away, people were beginning to realize that a man who was never supposed to disappear had just gone silent. And before the night was over, the entire sky would notice. The ride to the station took less than 15 minutes, but to Officer Ryan Mitchell it felt like the easiest part of his night. The road was nearly empty, illuminated by scattered streetlights and the occasional glow of gas station signs standing alone beside the highway. In the rear seat, Marcus Reed remained quiet. He did not argue. He did not complain. He simply watched the passing lights through the window, his expression calm in a way that Ryan found increasingly irritating. Most people in this situation asked questions. Most people tried to explain themselves. Marcus did neither. When they arrived at the station, the building looked exactly as it always did after midnight. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Coffee brewed somewhere in the background. A television mounted in the corner played a late-night news broadcast that nobody seemed to be watching. Ryan escorted Marcus inside and began routine paperwork. Several officers glanced up briefly before returning to their desks. To them, Marcus looked ordinary. A man in a worn jacket carrying a weathered duffel bag. Someone passing through town. Someone forgettable. Ryan placed a folder on the counter and started entering information into the system. Name. Date of birth. Temporary address. He expected the database to confirm whatever assumptions he had already made. Instead, he frowned. One screen loaded slowly. Then another. A message appeared requesting verification from a separate database. Ryan tried again. The same result appeared. Strange, but not alarming. Government systems malfunctioned all the time. Across the room, Marcus sat quietly in a chair beneath a wall clock. The second hand ticked steadily forward. Every few minutes his eyes drifted toward it. Not with anxiety. Not with impatience. Almost as if he were tracking a schedule known only to him. Officer Jenna Collins noticed it too. She approached Ryan carrying a stack of reports. Something wrong with the system, she asked. Ryan shrugged. Probably maintenance. Jenna glanced toward Marcus. He seems awfully calm. Ryan followed her gaze. Because he knows he has nowhere to go. Yet even as he spoke the words, he felt less certain than before. There was something unusual about the man. Not his appearance. Not his clothes. It was the way he carried himself. Marcus sat with the relaxed posture of someone who had spent years under pressure and learned not to fear it. Nothing about him suggested panic. Nothing about him suggested uncertainty. 20 miles away, at an unremarkable office complex hidden behind a row of warehouses, a different kind of concern was spreading. Phones rang. Computer screens displayed maps. Men and women moved quickly between workstations. One name appeared repeatedly across multiple monitors. Marcus Reed. A supervisor stared at the growing list of unanswered communications. His jaw tightened. Try again, he said. We have been trying. Then keep trying. Back at the station, Ryan opened Marcus's duffel bag for inventory. Most of the contents seemed ordinary. A change of clothes. A notebook. A flashlight. A sealed envelope with no visible markings. Then he found an old watch resting inside a side pocket. It looked worn from years of use. Ryan picked it up and turned it over. Engraved on the back was a symbol he did not recognize. He studied it for a moment before tossing the watch back into the bag. Across the room, Marcus finally spoke. You should be paying attention to the things that do not make sense. Ryan looked up. And why is that? Marcus met his eyes without hesitation. Because the clock is already running. Ryan Mitchell did not like being challenged, especially by someone who appeared to have no reason for confidence. Marcus Reed sat beneath the wall clock exactly where he had been for nearly an hour, his hands resting calmly in his lap, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the second hand as it continued its steady march forward. The station around him moved through its usual overnight rhythm. Officers completed reports. Dispatchers answered calls. Coffee cups were refilled. Yet Marcus seemed completely disconnected from the tension that surrounded him. It was as if he were waiting for something none of them could see. Ryan returned to the evidence counter and opened the duffel bag again. The strange watch remained on his mind. He removed the notebook this time and flipped through several pages. Most were blank. Others contained short entries written in neat handwriting. Dates. Locations. Times. Nothing illegal. Nothing useful. Still, Ryan felt annoyed by the lack of answers. People who had nothing to hide usually tried harder to explain themselves. Marcus simply watched. You keep looking for the wrong thing, Marcus finally said. Ryan glanced up. And what exactly should I be looking for? Marcus tilted his head slightly. The reason nobody can find me. The answer only deepened Ryan's frustration. Across the room, Jenna Collins paused while organizing paperwork. She had spent years around nervous suspects, angry suspects, frightened suspects, and confused suspects. Marcus fit none of those categories. The calmness felt different. Deliberate. Disciplined. She walked over and lowered her voice. Ryan, maybe we should verify this through another agency before keeping him here much longer. Ryan shook his head. The system will clear eventually. Jenna looked toward Marcus again. Maybe. But something feels off. Ryan dismissed the concern, but part of him was beginning to agree. At that same moment, nearly 100 miles away, a conference room filled with tense faces remained locked in silence. A digital map covered an entire wall. Several blinking markers moved slowly across the screen. One marker remained dark. A senior official stood with folded arms, staring at the empty space where a signal should have been. How long? He asked. 92 minutes without contact, someone answered. The room grew even quieter. Another official looked down at a report and exhaled slowly. That is far beyond the acceptable window. Back at the station, rain began tapping softly against the windows. Marcus listened to it for a moment. Then he looked directly at Ryan. What time is it? Ryan glanced at the clock. 12:43. Marcus nodded once. The reaction seemed insignificant, yet something about it unsettled Jenna. It was not relief. It was not concern. It was recognition. As though a deadline had just passed. Suddenly a dispatcher frowned at her computer screen. That is strange, she murmured. Another dispatcher looked over. What? Multiple calls coming in from federal offices. Ryan turned. About what? The dispatcher refreshed the screen twice. Her eyes widened slightly. Nobody is saying. They are only asking the same question. The room fell silent. What question? Ryan asked. The dispatcher swallowed. Then she read the message exactly as it appeared. They want to know if anyone has seen a man named Marcus Reed. For the first time that night, the confidence inside the station began to crack. The dispatcher stared at her screen while additional notifications appeared one after another. Different agencies. Different offices. Different states. Yet every message carried the same request. Locate Marcus Reed. Confirm status immediately. Officer Ryan Mitchell stepped closer to the desk. What federal office sent that? He asked. The dispatcher shook her head. Several of them. Another alert appeared. Then another. The room filled with the soft sounds of keyboards and incoming communications. Officers who had barely noticed Marcus an hour earlier were now exchanging uncertain glances. Ryan looked across the room toward the quiet man beneath the clock. Marcus had not moved. His expression remained calm, almost detached from the growing tension surrounding him. It was the expression of someone watching events unfold exactly as expected. Jenna Collins folded her arms. Ryan, I think we need to find out who this guy really is. Ryan wanted to dismiss the concern, but the situation was becoming impossible to ignore. He walked back to the evidence counter and opened the duffel bag once more. This time he examined every item carefully. The flashlight was heavier than expected. The notebook contained coded references he could not understand. The old watch still carried the unfamiliar insignia engraved on the back. None of it provided answers. Instead, each item seemed to create more questions. Across the state, inside the Secure Operations Center, the atmosphere had become noticeably more urgent. Large digital displays tracked transportation routes, communication networks, and active field operations. A senior coordinator stood at the center of the room reviewing updates from multiple teams. Any signal? He asked. Nothing. Any contact? No, the coordinator looked toward the dark marker on the screen. Then the contingency clock has already started. Several people exchanged uneasy looks. Nobody argued. Nobody questioned the statement. Everyone understood what it meant. Back at the station, rain continued falling outside. Water streamed down the windows while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city limits. Marcus watched the weather for a moment before speaking. How many calls now? The dispatcher looked up. How did you know? Marcus offered no answer. Ryan stepped forward. Enough games. Who are you? Marcus studied him quietly. You still think that is the important question? Then what is? Ryan demanded. Marcus glanced toward the wall clock again. The second hand continued its steady movement. Tick. 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 The important question, Marcus said, is why so many people are looking for someone they were never supposed to lose. The room fell silent. Before Ryan could respond, another notification appeared on the dispatcher's monitor. Her eyes widened. Chief, she called toward the back office. You need to see this. The police chief emerged moments later, reading the incoming message himself. His face slowly changed. Confusion became concern. Concern became disbelief. This cannot be right, he whispered. Jenna stepped closer. What is it? The chief looked up from the screen. The request did not come from one agency. He swallowed hard. It came from a Joint Command Task Force. Ryan frowned. What does that mean? The chief stared toward Marcus Reed. Outside, another distant rumble echoed through the night sky. It means, he said quietly, whoever this man is, a lot more than local law enforcement is looking for him. The storm outside intensified as midnight slipped toward morning, but the real pressure was building far beyond the walls of the station. None of the officers knew it yet, but the man sitting quietly beneath the clock had never been the center of the operation. He was only the shield protecting something far more important. Nearly 200 miles away, in a secure federal facility hidden behind layers of clearance and anonymity, a woman sat alone in a dimly lit room. Her name was Evelyn Brooks. To the outside world she did not officially exist. No public records. No interviews. No photographs. For almost 3 years she had quietly gathered information that powerful people wanted buried forever. Financial records. Communications. Internal documents. The kind of evidence capable of exposing an entire network operating in the shadows. For months, a specialized team had worked to keep her safe as authorities prepared the final phase of a confidential investigation. Marcus Reed had been assigned one responsibility above all others: ensure that Evelyn Brooks reached a secure location without attracting attention. That was why he had chosen the motel. That was why he had traveled alone. That was why he carried no visible sign of authority. The safest person in the operation was supposed to look completely forgettable. Inside the operations center, the urgency had reached a new level. A supervisor pointed toward a digital timeline projected across a wall. Several milestones were highlighted in red. We missed the transfer window, someone reported. Another analyst looked up from her screen. If contact is not restored soon, contingency protocols will activate automatically. Nobody liked hearing those words. Contingency protocols meant the situation had moved beyond routine recovery. It meant resources would begin mobilizing across multiple jurisdictions. Back at the station, Ryan Mitchell remained determined to prove that he was in control. Yet every new piece of information seemed to pull that control farther away. He watched as the chief finished another phone call and immediately answered a second one. Then a third. Each conversation appeared shorter than the last. Each left the chief looking more concerned. Marcus remained seated, his posture unchanged. The wall clock now showed 1:15 in the morning. Tick. 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 The sound seemed louder than before. Jenna approached him cautiously. If all of this is connected to you, why have you stayed so calm? Marcus looked toward the rain sliding down the glass doors at the front of the station. Because panic never solves a problem. Jenna hesitated. Then what does? Marcus answered without looking at her. Preparation. The word lingered in the air. A few seconds later, another call arrived. The dispatcher listened quietly before transferring it directly to the chief. This time the chief did not speak immediately after answering. He simply listened. His expression slowly changed. When the call ended, he lowered the receiver and stared across the room at Marcus Reed. "They found the missing witness," he said softly. Ryan frowned. "What witness?" The chief swallowed. "The one your suspect was protecting." For the first time all night, nobody in the station knew what to say. And somewhere beyond the storm clouds, preparations that had been invisible for hours were finally beginning to move into the open. The atmosphere inside the station had changed completely. What began as an ordinary overnight shift now felt like the center of something none of the officers fully understood. The rain continued falling outside, turning the parking lot into a mirror of scattered reflections and flashing streetlights. Every few minutes another phone rang. Another message arrived. Another request for information appeared on a screen. Yet despite the growing urgency, no one seemed capable of explaining exactly who Marcus Reed was. Ryan Mitchell hated uncertainty. It made him feel as though control was slipping through his fingers, one unanswered question at a time. He walked back to the evidence counter and spread the contents of Marcus's duffel bag across the surface once more. The notebook. The flashlight. The watch with the unfamiliar insignia. The sealed envelope. Each item seemed ordinary when viewed alone. Together they felt like pieces of a puzzle missing its center. Ryan picked up the envelope and held it under the fluorescent light. No name. No address. No markings. Just a plain sealed envelope. "What is in this?" he asked. Marcus looked at it briefly. "Something important." "Important to who?" Ryan pressed. Marcus met his eyes. "That depends on how much you value the truth." The answer irritated Ryan even more. Across the room, the chief was reviewing a stream of incoming updates with increasing concern. Several agencies were now requesting immediate status reports. Some requests carried authorization levels higher than anything the station normally encountered. Jenna noticed the chief rubbing his forehead while reading the latest message. "Bad news?" she asked quietly. "I do not know if it is bad news," the chief replied. "But it is definitely big news." At the operations center, the dark marker that represented Marcus Reed remained unchanged. Teams monitored transportation hubs, communication channels, and field assets. Every minute without direct contact increased the pressure. A young analyst turned toward the coordinator. The witness remained secure. Relief briefly crossed several faces. "Good," the coordinator said. "Then our biggest problem is still locating Reed." The analyst hesitated. "Sir, if he is where we think he is, they are about to figure out who they are holding." The coordinator looked toward the wall of monitors. "Then we are running out of time." Back at the station, Marcus glanced toward the front entrance. His expression remained composed, but something had shifted. It was subtle. A slight narrowing of his eyes. A brief moment of attention directed toward the darkness beyond the glass doors. Jenna noticed immediately. "What is it?" she asked. Marcus listened carefully. For several seconds, nobody heard anything unusual. Then a faint sound drifted through the rain. Low. Distant. Almost impossible to distinguish from the thunder. Ryan frowned. "What am I supposed to be hearing?" Marcus remained silent. The sound came again. Slightly louder this time. Several officers looked toward the windows. The chief slowly stood from his desk. Somewhere beyond the clouds, engines were moving through the night. Not cars. Not trucks. Something else. Something larger. The dispatcher looked down at her monitor as a new alert appeared. Her eyes widened. "Chief," she whispered. "You need to see this right now." The chief crossed the room and stared at the message. His face went pale. Ryan stepped closer. "What happened?" The chief looked toward the dark sky beyond the rain-covered glass. Then he looked back at Marcus Reed. They are coming here. The sound grew stronger with every passing second. What had begun as a distant vibration beyond the storm clouds was now impossible to ignore. Officers moved toward the windows. The dispatcher stopped typing. Even the chief stood frozen beside his desk. Outside, rain swept across the empty parking lot in silver sheets beneath the streetlights. Then the first set of lights appeared in the sky. One officer pressed closer to the glass. "What is that?" Nobody answered immediately. More lights emerged from the darkness. Then more. Large aircraft silhouettes slowly became visible through the clouds, their navigation lights flashing against the rain. The low rumble deepened until it seemed to roll across the entire town. Residents began stepping onto porches. Drivers pulled to the side of roads. People looked upward, trying to understand what they were seeing. Inside the station, Ryan Mitchell stared through the window with growing disbelief. "This cannot be about him," he said. Yet even as the words left his mouth, he knew how hollow they sounded. Marcus Reed remained seated beneath the clock. Calm. Patient. Unmoved. The same quiet confidence he had carried since arriving at the station now seemed far less mysterious. The chief looked from the sky back to Marcus. "Who are you?" he asked again. Marcus did not answer directly. Instead, he glanced toward the entrance doors. "You are about to find out." The operations center hundreds of miles away had transformed into a blur of activity. Communication channels were fully active. Teams coordinated movements across multiple jurisdictions. Screens displayed flight paths converging toward a single location. One analyst finally allowed herself a small breath of relief. Visual confirmation established. The coordinator nodded. "Good. Bring him home." Back at the station, the aircraft continued arriving overhead. Their presence was impossible to miss now. The windows rattled softly as the sound echoed across the city. Several officers exchanged nervous looks. None of them had ever seen this level of response directed toward a single individual. Jenna Collins stepped closer to Marcus. "All of this is because you missed a check-in." Marcus shook his head. "No," Jenna frowned. "Then why?" Marcus looked at her for a moment. "Because people were depending on me." The answer carried a weight that surprised her. There was no arrogance in his voice. No attempt to impress anyone. Only responsibility. Outside, headlights suddenly appeared at the far end of the parking lot. Then another set. And another. A convoy of dark government vehicles rolled through the rain and came to a stop in front of the station. Every conversation inside immediately died. The front doors opened. Water dripped from the coats of several officials as they entered with purposeful steps. They did not look around. They did not hesitate. Their attention focused on one person only. The room watched in complete silence as a senior officer approached Marcus Reed. The man stopped directly in front of him and offered a respectful nod. "Sir," he said. "We have been looking everywhere for you." For the first time all night, Ryan Mitchell felt the full weight of his mistake. Because the man he had dismissed as a nobody was clearly someone the entire system had been trying to find. The room remained silent long after the official spoke. Rain tapped against the windows. Radios crackled softly in the background. Nobody moved. Nobody seemed willing to break the moment. Marcus Reed slowly stood from his chair beneath the clock, and for the first time that night the officers saw him differently. Not because his appearance had changed, but because the story they had built around him had completely fallen apart. The senior official handed Marcus a secure communication device. "The witness has been transferred successfully," he said. "The operation remains intact." Marcus accepted the device with a slight nod. Relief appeared in his eyes for the first time all night. Ryan Mitchell watched the exchange with growing disbelief. "Operation?" he asked. "What operation?" The official turned toward him. His expression was professional, but firm. "An ongoing federal investigation involving multiple agencies." Ryan looked from the official back to Marcus. Who is he? The answer came from the police chief before anyone else could speak. He had just finished reviewing a newly delivered authorization packet. His hands trembled slightly as he lowered the folder. Marcus Reed is a senior field operative attached to a joint federal task force. The room grew even quieter. The chief continued reading. Former military service. Advanced operational assignments. Specialized witness protection responsibilities. Multiple commendations. Each sentence seemed heavier than the last. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. The ordinary traveler from the motel no longer existed. In his place stood someone entrusted with responsibilities far beyond anything Ryan had imagined. Jenna Collins looked toward Marcus. You knew all of this would happen, did you not? Marcus shook his head gently. No, she frowned. Then why were you so calm? Marcus glanced toward the rain-covered parking lot where government vehicles remained lined up beneath flashing lights. Because the mission was never about me. Those words lingered in the room. Not about recognition. Not about authority. Not about power. The entire night had been focused on protecting another person whose safety mattered more than his own comfort. The realization settled heavily over everyone present. At the operations center, several analysts finally allowed themselves to relax. The dark marker that had worried them for hours was active again. Communications had been restored. Timelines were back on schedule. One supervisor smiled for the first time all evening. He did it again, she said quietly. Another nodded. He always does. Back at the station, the senior official reviewed a final document with the chief. Procedures would be examined. Reports would be filed. Questions would be answered. Everything would happen through official channels. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation. Just accountability moving through the system exactly as it was designed to do. Ryan stood silently near the evidence counter. The watch. The notebook. The sealed envelope. Every clue had been in front of him from the beginning. Yet he had never truly seen them because he had already decided who Marcus was before asking who he might be. Marcus collected his belongings and prepared to leave. Before reaching the door, he paused briefly. His eyes met Ryan's for a moment. There was no anger there. No triumph. Only quiet understanding. And somehow that felt far more powerful than any punishment Ryan had imagined. The rain had begun to fade by the time Marcus Reed stepped through the station doors. The storm that had covered the city for most of the night was moving east, leaving behind wet pavement that reflected the glow of streetlights and emergency vehicles. The aircraft overhead were gradually departing, their distant lights disappearing beyond the clouds one by one. For the people standing outside the station, the night would become a story they would tell for years. For Marcus, it was simply another mission finally coming to an end. The senior officials accompanied him toward one of the waiting vehicles, speaking quietly about schedules, reports, and secure locations. Yet before he entered the convoy, Marcus paused and looked back at the building. Through the glass entrance he could still see the officers inside. Some were watching him. Others were returning to their duties. Life was already beginning to move forward. Inside, Ryan Mitchell remained standing near the evidence counter. The station felt different now. Smaller somehow. The confidence he had carried earlier in the evening had been replaced by something else. Reflection. For hours he had believed he understood exactly who Marcus Reed was. He had looked at a motel room, a worn jacket, a quiet traveler, and decided the entire story before learning a single fact. The realization stayed with him. Jenna Collins approached quietly. You okay? Ryan let out a slow breath. I thought I was reading the situation correctly. Jenna nodded. We all make judgments. Ryan looked toward the front doors where Marcus had disappeared into the night. Some judgments cost more than others. The chief emerged from his office carrying a folder. Procedures would continue. Reviews would happen. Lessons would be learned. Not because anyone demanded revenge, but because accountability mattered. That was how trust survived. Outside, Marcus finally entered the vehicle waiting for him. As the convoy pulled away, he looked through the rain-speckled window at the city passing by. Stores were closed. Roads were quiet. Most people slept peacefully, unaware of how close they had come to seeing an important operation unravel. Evelyn Brooks was safe. The evidence she carried was secure. The mission had succeeded. In the end, that was what mattered most. Several miles later, the senior official seated beside him smiled slightly. Quite a night. Marcus returned a small smile of his own. They usually are. The official shook his head. You could have told them who you were from the beginning. Marcus looked out at the dark horizon. That would have defeated the point. What point? Marcus waited a moment before answering. Respect should not depend on a title, a badge, a rank, or a clearance level. The vehicle continued down the highway. The first hint of dawn was beginning to appear beyond the distant trees. A new day was arriving. Marcus watched the growing light and thought about how easily people could overlook one another. How quickly assumptions could replace understanding. How often worth was measured by appearances instead of character. The world would keep making that mistake. But every now and then, it would be reminded of a simple truth. The most important person in the room is not always the one who looks powerful. Sometimes the person everyone ignores is carrying responsibilities no one else can see. And sometimes the difference between injustice and respect begins with a single choice to treat every human being with dignity before you know their story.